Thousands of anti-war activists have gathered near a NATO base in southwestern Germany to protest against the U.S. military presence there. Protesters called for peace during their sit-in outside of Ramstein Air Base. They lashed out at the policies of the Western powers on the Ukraine war, as Washington and its allies keep pumping weapons into the country. Protesters said the military support has fueled the conflict.
Yes, they have once in a month, I think, or they have meetings with ministers from all of Europe and USA, and they are planning how to support Ukraine, what they need, and now with the weapons that go to Ukraine, we said it's very dangerous. Yeah, in conflicts to get more weapons, more soldiers. Yes, and we see that it's more and more, and it's escalating.
The demonstrators were also critical of drone attacks from the airbase, which is the largest run by the U.S. military overseas. They said each of those attacks killed tens of civilians in Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere. The base, built in the early 1950s, hosts some 15,000 military personnel. Rex Simmons is a researcher at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies who joins us. Well, you have a protest over here which shows, obviously, first the level of knowledge that these protesters have about what is going on when it comes to these drones that have been used, especially how they have led to the civilian deaths in countries like Afghanistan. But more importantly, what can be done in terms of a change of direction in the end result, of which obviously drones, one of the extreme consequences is the fact that it has led to so many civilian deaths.
Okay, well, if you're looking at drones, they're seen as a cheap and easy way of pretending to wage war on an enemy. What it is, as you note, I mean, it's something which is waging war mostly on civilians, because this is what they kill, and this has been proven in many conflicts. Afghanistan you mentioned, but also the drone attacks which occurred over Pakistan as well. And so there needs to be a fundamental rethinking of why the West goes to war, because at the moment this is done because they think they're militarily more powerful and that they can do so and there is no one else to oppose them. Which, I mean, if anything, this war in Ukraine has shown to be a false basis. And so this is why you're getting protests, for example, at the moment outside Ramstein Air Base, because people are beginning to understand that the West is going to war not because of necessity, but because of choice and political convenience.
Do you find it kind of odd when you look at the protests that happen in different countries, this being one example where you have the protesters protesting against the U.S. presence, but you don't really hear about protesters who protest against presence of other countries? I mean, I can mention a long list of countries where people come out and protest against the U.S. military presence. Why is it that the U.S. military presence angers people, in this case in Germany, but also in other parts of the world?
I mean, historically, if you look at it, the Americans were quite open about the purpose of NATO. And I mean, they had this catchphrase that NATO is designed to keep Germany down, America in, and Russia out of Europe. I mean, this becomes much more obvious now. And of course, if we listen to the American rhetoric, I mean, they keep on saying, well, if you let Russia, once you let Russia into your country, they never leave. And this is coming from the United States that has been in Japan, in Germany since 1945, with no intention of leaving, and causing serious political and geopolitical problems for those countries while it is trying and struggling to save its own hegemony. I mean, the Americans will sacrifice any country, regardless of whether it's friend or foe, to secure their main geostrategic interest. And the main geostrategic interest of the United States at this particular moment in time is to retain their global hegemony.
When you talk about, or when you mentioned the U.S. will sacrifice, what do you mean exactly, sacrifice?
Well, they use countries to attack their opponents. I mean, if we look at Iran's example, I mean, they used Iraq from 1980 to 1989 to try and destroy Iran. They supplied it with chemical weapons. They supplied it with all kinds of other weapons. I mean, you can see what's happening between Ukraine and Russia today. It's not strictly between Ukraine and Russia. This is a bigger picture where the U.S. it's not a land power. It's a naval and air power. So it uses other countries to do things where it has a disadvantage, and that is in the ability to project land power.
All right, very well. Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Greg Simmons there, researcher at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies. Thank you.